All right, good morning. My name is Komay Ajis. I'm the Executive Director of SCAG, and I would like to welcome you all to Super Bowl Monday. Hope your team won. Seriously, just want to welcome you all to this session, this preemptive session or preview session, I think we call it. It's a workshop on the RHNA appeals process. The RHNA appeals process is scheduled to begin after the release of the draft RHNA numbers by jurisdiction in early April, and it will be based on the final RHNA methodology. Because we don't have a final RHNA methodology yet, we really can't begin the appeals process. Once the methodology has been approved by our board, we would have numbers assigned to each jurisdiction based on the methodology, and that would then allow us to begin the appeals process. On the status of the final RHNA methodology, as many of you know, the State Housing and Community Development Department recently determined that SCAG's draft RHNA methodology is in compliance with statutory objectives. With HCD's findings of compliance, staff will proceed to recommend that the Regional Council approve the draft RHNA methodology as the final RHNA methodology. And this will go through the normal process, such as through the RHNA subcommittee and through the CHD committee with RC adoption, Regional Council adoption scheduled for March 5th. All things being equal. RHNA is a necessary step, as you all know, as we begin to confront the housing crisis that kind of besets us in the South, in Southern California and across the state for that matter. It is truly, the housing crisis is truly an existential issue for us, one that we take very seriously. And I've talked about this in the past. The housing crisis requires our collective action to address this challenge in a more concerted way. Now, fortunately, this is also the time that we will be, we do in fact have additional resources available to us through the auspices of AB 101. The state, in their good judgment, have provided us resources that will be close to about 100 million coming to Southern California, half of that to SCAG and the other half directly to all of our jurisdictions, all 197 cities and counties. The AB 101 resources that's coming to SCAG, we recently conducted a survey to better identify what the housing planning needs are across our region. And we're using that information to sort of devise a program that will be going through our committee process and ultimately board approval. There are also other funding sources that are supportive of housing. We're all familiar with the Strategic Growth Council's AHSC funds and the SB2 funding, which is really gratifying to now know that 170 out of 197 jurisdictions have applied for SB2 money. A couple of months ago, we were like, I think at 42. So I'm really gratified that a lot of our cities and counties have taken on the task of applying for these funds that are there for you and uncontested and available for planning, housing planning. So the above is just a heads up for you, and we're seeking approval of applications for AB 101 early funding. We're going to the state for the early funding resources that are available through AB 101 so that we can begin work immediately. And we are taking this request to our regional council on Thursday. Finally, we have been at this RHNA process for the last 16 months. And I think, except for December, just about every month we've had some public process and public discussion related to RHNA. And from my assessment, we think it's been mostly cordial and, but it has been open. We don't always all agree, but I think it's very instructive that we've been at this for 16 months, and we have a few more months to go, and we've sort of continued to make progress, whether or not we're all in agreement as to where we go. I want to sort of appreciate all of you all that have been part of this for the engagement and staying with it every month. I think it's instructive that folks have paid attention and shown up to the conversations we've been having every month, and the collaboration that we've had in the process, because we couldn't get this far without everybody's participation and involvement. And so I want to sort of take the moment to appreciate that. This engagement, the level of engagement we've had and the collaboration we've had is essential to the planning process. So those are my welcome remarks. I'm just the pretty face that welcomes you all. The real folks that are doing the work will now walk you through the procedures and processes of the appeals process. So I'm going to ask Ping to come up.
Thank you, Comey, and also welcome to all of you at the Los Angeles office and our regional offices, as well as I think using the webinar option. I'm Ping Chen, Manager of Compliance and Performance Monitoring at SCAG. So I will help kind of to steer, I think, the rest of the session. So before we start the presentation portion of the workshop, I just like to note two workshop logistic related information. And I think first is all the workshops materials, I think, have been posted online at the RHNA webpage. That is probably the most important webpage for RHNA purposes. And I think most of you have been using that, I think, very frequently. It's at the www.scag.ca.gov/RHNA. And as you know that after today's workshop, we will also taking, I think, any of the written comments till a week from today. So that's February the 10th. And the reason for that is we would like to consider all the comments received that from this workshop, as well as during the comment period, to develop a staff recommended RHNA appeals procedures for the RHNA subcommittee consideration, as Comey mentioned, at their meeting on February 24th. And again, I think all the future meetings are also posted on the SCAG RHNA webpage. And at this workshop, we will also have the Q&A opportunities. So for those of you using the webinar, first, thank you for reducing the VMT, but also please email any of your questions during the workshop to housing@scag.ca.gov. We hopefully to address some of those questions. We might not be able to address all of those, but all will be considered and the questions will be responded. As Comey mentioned, this is a workshop focusing on the appeals procedure after the final methodology is adopted. So before we go into the details of the appeals procedure, we will first provide you a quick refresher of the RC approved draft methodology, for which, as Comey mentioned earlier, staff will recommend as the final methodology. So with that, I will ask Kevin Kane, I think, of SCAG's staff to come up.
Hi, thanks, Ping. I'm Kevin Kane, SCAG staff. I'm just going to provide a little bit of overview and recap of the draft RHNA methodology and the HCD review process, just so that we're kind of all starting on the same page for Mayan to subsequently go into the details of the appeal step. So, the methodology ultimately is how we disperse the state mandated 1,341,827 housing units to local jurisdictions following the 5 statutory objectives of RHNA. We began with, and the terminology can get a little bit confusing as to which stage we're in, so hopefully this helps a little bit. We began with what we call the proposed RHNA methodologies. You may remember these as options 1, 2, and 3 that were put out for public comment in August and September of 2019. After taking into account those public comments and discussing amongst themselves, discussing amongst the subcommittee, CEHD, and Regional Council, the RC voted to adopt one draft RHNA methodology to provide to HCD for their review. That took place in November of last year. Statutorily, HCD has 60 days to review the methodology and see to what extent they feel it furthers the 5 objectives of RHNA. On day number 60, which was January 13th, sometime late afternoon, I believe, before 5 o'clock, so they were in the clear. HCD responded to us, and they actually requested that no changes be made to the draft methodology, and they found it to further the 5 statutory objectives of RHNA. We did allow for the possibility that there would be some requested changes, some pushback from the state, but that was not the case. So currently, as it stands, we have direction from the Regional Council and state approval to take the draft methodology, which was approved in November, and recommend that as the final RHNA methodology for the subcommittee meeting later this month and the March 5th Policy Committee and Regional Council meetings. So this is kind of, I'd say almost like a 10-month slog process as we turn from draft to final, because the appeals will ultimately in September, October or so of this year yield the final post-appeal phase RHNA methodology. So that's where we are right now. I wanted to just go through a little bit of the objectives of RHNA in the context of what HCD looked at and what they found when they went through our draft methodology. I put HCD comments there up in yellow. And the objectives were the basis for their review, literally being enumerated with some sort of an analysis or justification provided by the state on each one of these points, increasing the housing supply and mix, infill equity, et cetera, being goal number 2, jobs housing balance encapsulated in 3, social equity adjustment of sorts in 4, and then AFFH in 5. I've pulled out a couple of HCD's comments here in yellow, and they definitely went through with a finer tooth comb than they have for other MPOs so far. HCD used 369 words to find Sandag's methodology consistent with RHNA objectives. They used 1,042 words to find SCAG's methodology in compliance to further the RHNA objectives, and they actually used data-based analyses for the first time that we've seen from the state. The areas that they were most thorough in was an analysis to ensure that there is more RHNA in higher income jurisdictions as opposed to lower income jurisdictions. And secondly, they were very concerned with the balance between lower income RHNA and the number of low wage or lower wage jobs in a jurisdiction. So those were the 2 points that we feel they went the most deeply with in analyzing to ensure that our methodology furthered the statutory objectives. They did not comment on the projected need side of the methodology. They commented on some of the existing need factors, the jobs accessibility, transit accessibility, social equity adjustment factors, things like that, and they analyzed the overall impact. And just by way of a very quick recap, because we've been kind of in this process, as Comey mentioned, for a total of well over a year now. This is what the draft methodology was. More detailed information certainly is on the RHNA website, as Ping mentioned. The bottom line is that we split between projected and existing need. Projected need representing about 500,000 or so units, and existing need about 830,000 units. Existing need is split between transit accessibility measures and job accessibility measures with a redistribution feature to ensure that lower resourced or disadvantaged communities don't receive exceptionally high elements from those other 2 factors. All of it is taken together, and social equity adjustment is based on income and also resource scores. We're happy to go into more detail on that, but since we've already covered that in previous meetings, I'm not going to go into too much more detail here on the methodology. So at this point, if we have any questions, we can take some on the HCD review process or methodology process before getting into appeals.
Thanks, Kevin. So for the Q&A, I think we will start from the Los Angeles office and then the regional office, and then those, I think, on the web. And so I think any kind of clarifying, so something at this time, I think I think the questions were focusing on the clarifying, because I think we are not kind of going back, I think, to discuss in terms of the details in terms of the reasons, I think, for the methodology, since that has been approved and as well as document has been provided, posted on the web for the past 3 months. So I think any clarifying questions from the Los Angeles office? Nate.
Mic here?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so I just have a couple questions. One of them is, in the list of future events related to the draft RHNA, there's an April meeting that's outlined in there. It says receive and file. I'm wondering what the difference is between the March meeting and the April meeting related to RHNA.
Okay, so good question. So the March meeting is the adoption of the final methodology. And then the April meeting is basically based on the adopted final methodology. We will basically distribute the so-called draft RHNA number because it's still before it's finalized in April. So and that one is only a review and receive and file item.
Okay.
So.
And then the second question that I had has to do with, at one point, I want to say it was the CEHD committee, but maybe it was regional council, had considered the possibility of pushing back on the state again on the regional determination number. And there was some discussion about an ad hoc committee being formed and that being brought back for consideration. And I guess my question tied in with that is that there have been a number of recent articles that have come out in the paper that talk about how Governor Newsom actually stretched the housing truth about the 3.5 million housing units. And I'm wondering if with that information coming out, if perhaps there's some opportunity to further look into that, sort of look at that regional determination number again, since I think everyone was shocked by that large number. And I'm wondering if there's been any consideration by SCAG to reevaluate that number to push back with the state on that.
If I can just address that real quickly, Nate. Yeah, there was obviously some consternation about the 1.34 million that was assigned to us. And the regional council had a vigorous debate about it, and there was direction. The President Billion, formed a kind of an ad hoc committee to look at all of the possibilities up to and including litigation. And that committee was well stocked with the right people, and we had several meetings. Actually, we had 1 or 2 meetings to discuss the next steps, and that resulted in the letter that the president sent to HCD. And subsequent to the letter, he and I met with the director of HCD in December. I think the final resolution is HCD has the ultimate and jurisdiction to give us a number, and there's really no appeal to it, other than we protested and told them that they did not recognize the role of the COG as required by statute. And so our pushback, I think it was met with a mild revision of about 2,900 downwards from the number originally provided to us. And that really is the end of play on that situation. With regards to what's in the press, we just don't have the liberty to play the press. I mean, that's just what's going on in the press. We have, under statute, we have an obligation that HCDs provide to us, and we're just trying to make sure that we work those numbers as best as we can.
Thank you.
Okay, I think anyone in the Los Angeles office? If not, we will go to the regional office, the Orange County. Anyone has questions?
No questions in Orange County. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so I did not see any other regional offices, I think, with okay, San Bernardino office. Riverside office, San Bernardino office, any questions? Arnold?
Morning, Ping, everybody. No, thank you. No questions here in Riverside, okay. San Bernardino.
Okay, Riverside office?
No questions here.
Thank you. Okay, and Ventura office?
No questions here.
Okay, Imperial office?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay, okay, thanks. And then, so now we will go to those who are on the web. And then, so so we have not received, I think, any written questions. Okay, I think with that, then we will go into the more details of the appeals procedures. So I will ask Mayan Johnson, SCAG staff, I think, to come up.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mayan Johnson, Housing and Land Use Planner here at SCAG. So the next question is, so you don't like your RHNA number, what do you do next? Well, there is an appeals process that we go through. So as Ping mentioned, once you get your draft RHNA allocation in April, we'll begin the RHNA appeals process. So the RHNA process timeline, after you get the draft RHNA allocation in April, we'll be distributing that to all jurisdictions and also posting that on our website. This spring and summer, we'll be conducting the appeals process. The results of those appeals will be folded into the final RHNA allocation that's planned for adoption in October of this year. So that's coming around the corner. And then your housing elements are due in October 2021. So for those who are RHNA veterans, those who have been here for the 5th cycle, maybe even the 4th cycle, I see some faces, some heads nodding in the room. You'll notice that there's actually a lot of changes that have been made since the last cycle due to recent legislation. The most notable ones have to do with, first, the appeals procedures themselves. In the 4th and 5th RHNA cycles, there are actually 2 separate processes to reduce a RHNA allocation. You might remember the revision request process, but this time around, there's only one streamlined appeals process. For who can appeal, in prior cycles, it was just the jurisdiction in question, but for the 6th cycle, not only can a jurisdiction appeal their own number, but they can appeal someone else's number. So make friends with your neighbors because they might file an appeal because they don't like your draft RHNA allocation. HCD can also appeal this time around as well. So there's 3 main parties that can appeal a draft RHNA allocation. So you can imagine the spring and summer will be very busy, not just for us, but possibly for your jurisdiction as well. For basis of appeal, for prior cycles, we noted that you couldn't, based on state housing law, you can't base an appeal on local ordinances. For the 6th cycle, state law specifically forbids basing an appeal on local ordinances, but also the addition of underproduction of housing based on the last RHNA cycle, and also stable population growth for the last RHNA cycle. So if you do plan to appeal, please do not include this in your appeals documentation and response. So the RHNA appeals timeline, there'll be a 45-day filing period after we distribute the draft RHNA allocation. We don't have the exact date finalized, but we will include this as part of the RHNA subcommittee staff report and that final report. And we'll also blanket the region with announcements of key dates. But that will begin in early April and that'll occur through mid-May. After the appeals filing period, we'll have a comment period. This is also new for this cycle. State law allows for jurisdictions any jurisdiction to provide comment on filed appeals and also HCD. That'll occur between May and June of this year. And then there'll be a public hearing period that has to occur within 30 days after the comment period. So we don't have the exact dates, but again, we'll have key dates and we'll blanket the region, but they'll occur in July of this year. So make sure you to clear your schedule for July. So who can file an appeal? Not just a jurisdiction, but other jurisdictions can file an appeal, and also HCD can file an appeal as well. So a basis for appeal, this comes directly from Government Code Section 65584.05b. And there's 3 main bases for appeal. They are local planning factors and information on affirmatively furthering fair housing, application of the final RHNA methodology, and the third one is change of circumstance. And I'll go over what each of these mean in the next few slides. The basis for appeal must also include a statement why this revision is necessary to further the objectives in RHNA law. So if you wanted to look at those, Government 65584. And since many of you have already seen these next few slides, I'll just go through them quickly. but make sure that it meets any one of these objectives or to further them. So they must either increase housing supply, mix of housing types, promoting infill development and socioeconomic equity, promoting improved intra-regional relationship between jobs and housing, allocating a lower proportion of housing need in income categories where they're already over-concentrated, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. So local planning factors, many of you have filled out a survey and sent that back up to SCAG, but these are local planning factors, opportunities and constraints within your local jurisdiction. They cover many things, and again, the full listing is in state housing law, but they're existing and projected jobs housing balance, water and sewer service, open space, rate of overcrowding, presence of a four-year college or university. So a basis for appeal can be based on any of these factors. And also information related to affirmatively furthering fair housing. In a nutshell, AFFH is basically to ensure that we're not perpetuating historical segregation patterns for disadvantaged communities. So the full listing is in 65584.04B and E of Government Code. The next two, application of methodology. So this isn't appealing the RHNA methodology, just so we're all clear, but this is the application of methodology for that draft RHNA allocation, for the jurisdiction. So this can be 1 and 2 for local planning factors or AFFH, and application of methodology. Those can be filed on based on the jurisdiction in question or HCD. However, the third one, that's change of circumstance, that can only be filed by where that change of circumstance occurred. So if you're appealing someone else's, another jurisdiction's number, you can't quote change of circumstance as a basis for appeal. So appeals cannot be based on not only any local ordinance that restricts residential development or restricts the permitting of residential development in a jurisdiction. They also cannot be based on prior underproduction of housing from previous RHNA cycles, and also stable population numbers from previous RHNA cycles. And again, these are new for this cycle, so please do not include them in your appeals documentation. After the appeals filing period, between mid-May and the end of June 2020, we will have a 45-day comment period and we'll be posting all appeals that were filed on our website, and we'll also let all jurisdictions know of who has filed an appeal. The notification and posting of filed appeals will also update all of our committees as needed, and again, blanket the region with these key dates. So local jurisdictions and HCD can comment on any of the filed appeals. So if your jurisdiction did not appeal, but someone else appealed your jurisdiction's number, this is probably the time you'll find out. So you may want to comment during this time. After the appeals comment date, we'll have the public hearings, and those will take place in July of this year. So all filed appeals will be heard by the RHNA Appeals Board. Right now it's the RHNA subcommittee that will be serving as the RHNA Appeals Board. They will review all information submitted by the jurisdiction and also comments received during that comment period. SCAG staff will also provide a staff report response to all appeals filed, and then the applicant at the hearing will also be able to provide any further information or rebuttals at the appeals hearing itself. So what happens after the appeals hearings? All successful appeals will be reallocated back to the region. So the regional determination, that 1.34 million, at a minimum, we have to meet that same exact number at the end of the process. So government code allows for the reallocation of appeals based on either, if it's less than 7% of the regional determination, so that's 93,928 units, they're reallocated back proportionally to all jurisdictions. If they're more than 93,928 units, we'll apply a methodology that's similar to the existing need formula. So anything above that amount, so anything less than 93,928 will be proportional back to the region. Anything more than that, the residual above that, will be reallocated with a methodology. So that methodology is described in the appeals procedures. So once again, the final RHNA allocation, all appeals will be folded back into the final RHNA allocation, and we'll be having that for adoption through a public hearing at our regional council meeting in October 2020. So the next steps for the appeals process, the appeals procedures, we're looking for comments through next Monday, but we're bringing a staff report and a recommended final procedures to the RHNA subcommittee. We'll also review the final RHNA methodology that same day. On March 5th, at our CHD and Regional Council, we'll also be reviewing those documents. And on April 2nd, we recommend the release of the draft RHNA allocation, and we'll be sending out the draft allocation to all jurisdictions so that the appeals process can begin. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Ping, and I think we're going to go through Q&A after Kevin presents.
Thanks, Mayan. It's Kevin Kane here again. I just wanted to take a second as kind of the numbers guy on the project for some extent to put another point on the post-appeal reallocation item here that Mayan described. So as you know, we have, and as Komei and everyone had discussed before, we have a very high regional determination. Regionally, that's greater than 20% of the current housing stock. So I know a lot of local jurisdictions have said, oh my gosh, this is a large percentage increase. It largely flows from the high regional percentage increase. In past cycles, HCD had actually provided somewhat of a range so that we could accommodate some successful appeals without having to do any sort of a post-appeal reallocation. So in the fifth cycle, we had a range between 409,000 and 438,000 units that was given to us by HCD. We ended up at 412,000. I don't believe there were any appeals to account for, but in any case, they did provide that kind of a buffer so that this step did not take as much prominence. However, this time they gave us a very specific estimate, which means that any appeals, if there's any number that gets reduced, that has to be reallocated somewhere else. And that's something that is at the purview of the RHNA subcommittee to kind of consider alongside the appeal. We do want to note too that the post-appeal redistribution, if there is any, would also still have to further RHNA's statutory objectives. As Mayan mentioned, HCD has the opportunity to appeal directly currently. They can provide comments on the appeals, and they do get an opportunity to review the final allocation plan after the appeal stage. So the bottom line is that, we wanted to make kind of this post-appeal reallocation as clear as possible. Some of it's statutorily defined. What isn't is a part of the, will be the agenda packet for the meeting in 3 weeks, which you see a draft version of here, part of our appeals procedures. So statute actually says that if the appealed number is less than 7%, which is 93,928, that number gets reallocated back to all jurisdictions. So that we don't run afoul of not furthering RHNA objectives or compromising other RHNA objectives, we're recommending a methodology. So statute says that if it's over 7%, any of that amount, SCAG gets to decide how to allocate that. In this procedure document that you see here, we're recommending that we follow roughly the same existing need methodology that was already approved by Regional Council and reviewed by HCD, transit access, job access, and a reallocation component for the lower resource jurisdictions. That would only apply to any number over about 94,000. So we're doing that. We're making that as clear up front as possible so that we kind of have an understanding that any appeals will not fundamentally change the extent to which the RHNA methodology furthers the RHNA objectives. So the bottom line to remember, I think, from this is that any appeals are going to go back to the region in a way that is fairly consistent with the methodology that's already been adopted. And thanks for letting me make that final point. And I think Ping will open up Q&A.
Okay, so for the Q&A session, again, for those who are on the web, that you are welcome to email your questions to housing@scag.ca.gov. And I think certainly that after the workshop, you are still welcome to email us any of your questions or particularly, I think, comments that will be due a week from today. So before we open up the Q&A, I think just make one observation. I hope by now that, as we all have heard, that for the core of the RHNA appeals procedure, I think really they are based on the statutory requirements. And I think in terms of the core of the appeals is basically the basis that one could use to appeal, as well as some of the limitation in terms of the scope of the appeals. So in terms of discretions that SCAG has, I think one is this post-appeal, the redistribution methodology. And I think even that, I think we also have the constraint in terms of to further the statutory objectives. And then the other discretion, I think, is probably more on the process end, because this time, I think it will involve, I think, an additional party. And I think in the appeal process that I think in the past, it's only the jurisdictions, they appeal their own RHNA number. But this time we could possibly have the jurisdiction appeal another jurisdiction number. So I think it seems to me, I think those are kind of the two areas that the main areas that the SCAG has some discretion. So with that, I think we will open up the questions Q&A first, I think in the Los Angeles office. So I think anyone, I think has any questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, quick question.
If you could
Sure.
just mention your name.
Tim
and-
Howe, City of San Fernando.
Okay, welcome.
Just a question about the bases for appeal. For jurisdictions that may be interested in appealing another jurisdiction's allocation, one of the areas that are not a basis was noted the prior underproduction of housing units. But I was curious because in the verbiage that was shared, it mentions that that can't be utilized as a justification for a reduction in a jurisdiction's share. However, if policymakers in one jurisdiction are unhappy about another jurisdiction's lack of historic production, how would that factor in, and could that be used as a basis?
Based on our interpretation of the law, it still shouldn't be quoted as such, but if somehow there's a planning factor you find that fits in to why you think that appeal should be granted, I would recommend quoting that instead of using just strictly underproduction of housing.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions from Nate?
I have a few, but I don't want to take the time away from anyone else who might have questions here. But so if I can walk through those.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Nate Farnsworth, City of Yorba Linda. First question is, will appeals be redistributed back to successfully appealing jurisdictions?
Okay, let's do that. And then Kevin, maybe do that. Yeah.
Sure. Hi, Nate. Thanks for your question. It's a bit of finicky, getting through the appeals document. But what it does specify there is that if you have a successful appeal, that number, say you reduce your number by 1,000, you get minus 1,000. Everyone gets, whatever. And then you may still get some from everyone else's successful appeals if there are any.
But not from your own successful appeal.
They're aggregated at the end, so you will get a piece of that.
A piece of your own number that you appeal.
Of the aggregation for the.
So I should over appeal then. Okay. Also, will there be any sort, let me just give a situational. Let's say that I'm happy with my number. Appeals process goes through, no one appeals mine, I don't appeal anyone else's. And let's say, for example, let's just use the elephant in the room of Los Angeles. Los Angeles appeals half of its number. And that entire number gets redistributed back out to all the jurisdictions. And let's say that now my number has tripled in size and I'm uncomfortable with that number. Is there any sort of, and I know that's an extreme example, but I'm trying to use it to make the point of, is there any sort of, if at the end of the appeals process, is there any opportunity for jurisdictions who didn't appeal but are now significantly impacted because of the redistribution process? Is there any opportunity for them to voice concerns or appeal the appeal?
Not for the reallocation. Once the appeals process is done, there are no more appeals. So the redistribution is after that.
Okay. And then My last question, I think, oh, two more questions. One, during the comment period, do I have to have been appealed or appeal in order to make comments during the appeal period? Or is it just open to anyone to make comments during the comment period?
The law specifically says any jurisdiction or HCD. So if you're not the subject of one or you didn't file one, you can still comment.
Okay. And then my last question is, when HCD reviews the final post-allocation plan, in the law it says that they review it for consistency with the existing and projecting housing need for the region, and they may revise the determination of SCAG if necessary to obtain this consistency. Curious, how does SCAG read what that means? I guess, what are the outcomes that can come from HCD's final review of the allocation plan from your read of the law?
Sure. At least my interpretation of it is in the event that we go lower than the 1.34 million for some reason, that they would then they adjust our final plan to make sure that it's the same as what they had at the beginning for the regional determination.
Okay.
I can't imagine them stepping in, especially with them being involved in the determination process, methodology, and the appeals process, that they would make any changes going up beyond that number because they were so involved in the process.
Well, and I guess the other outcome is, do you see with this that HCD has the opportunity to, let's say that even after their comment and everything, during the appeals process, SCAG comes up with its final determination, sends it up to HCD, and HCD says, we don't like the way you redistributed these numbers to these jurisdictions. Do you see that that's within their purview of tinkering with the way that things were redistributed, or is it solely, do you think, based off of the regional determination, and is it consistent with that total number?
On that note, if I could add, is our current recommendation is to utilize the distribution methodology, I think in the draft methodology that has already been found, I think, to be in compliance. Okay. And that is actually one of the reasons that we are not changing the methodology. Okay. I think in the redistribution phase. So that's a good question.
Okay. I think those are all my questions.
This is Marika Pointer with the City of Irvine. I have a just quick follow-up on Nate's question about the appeals using the LA example, even though it's hypothetical. So what if you get to the point and the RHNA appeals are made and that's redistributed and it really impacts a lot of jurisdictions? Wouldn't the CEHD and Regional Council have the final say in the approval of the final allocation, that they could void the appeals and go back to original numbers? Is there some step there? Otherwise, it seems like the CEHD and Regional Council's kind of for not.
So the RHNA subcommittee charter, which also talks about the RHNA appeals board and their decisions, the appeals process, the appeals board is the final hearing body for those appeals. So CEHD and RC couldn't go back and change the appeals decisions made by the board, the appeals board.
Okay, yes, please. Okay.
I guess it's on. So just following up on the example of LA, I think at this point we didn't have any thoughts of appealing, but now I have concerns because of the redistribution of numbers. So is there at some point before the numbers are redistributed, will there be an opportunity to kind of figure out what your new number could be before the appeals process so that you can then try to file an appeal if it seems like it's going to seriously negatively affect the number where you think you may not be able to zone for that housing?
Yeah, thanks for kind of bringing up that point. You know, we kind of do have a good sense here via kind of a modified RHNA calculator. Basically, you know, there's an estimate tool. You can pretty much get a good sense of what redistribution would look like. It would be roughly proportionate to a city's current share of the RHNA allocation. I believe in the city of Los Angeles case, that's something just a little north of 30% of the entire region's RHNA. So say if there were 100,000 units successfully appealed, it would be something along those lines. Unfortunately, we just don't have any way of knowing in advance the volume of appeals that we'll get and the magnitude of appeals we'll get. Are these for fairly small revisions of dozens or hundreds of units, or are these hypothetical revisions of thousands of units that may actually have an appreciable numerical change? So we don't really have a great sense of that, other than to say that it would be roughly proportionate, and that's certainly something for staff to consider, for the RHNA subcommittee to consider as appeals are being evaluated.
And let me just stress that Nate's hypothetical was really a stretch. And so, because I don't want people to start freaking out like LA is going to dump a lot of units on everybody else, that's likely not going to happen. And if they do, they get 30% of whatever they dump. So we have to keep in mind that the likelihood of the appeals being successful is also a key point of this. And so just because somebody's appealing a large number doesn't mean they get to be successful. So I would hesitate to begin to worry about this huge number that gets reassigned. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. It's within the realm of possibility. I think that's the point Nate was making. So, but I'm beginning to sense that people are internalizing this, and you're beginning to feel really weird about what's going to happen. Ultimately, when the numbers all add up and the successful appeals all get added up, we'll know very quickly. But the truth of the matter is, there will be no appeals beyond that. So we'll just take those numbers and then reassign them. And that's going to be the end of the process. I think that's what staff is trying to get across. And we'll keep track of the appeals process. We want to make sure that we don't get HCD stepping in and making a different call. So we're going to try and stay very close to what we've already seen them agree to. And so we're going to follow that same process. So that's why we are where we are today. So I hope that's a little bit of a comfort to folks, that you're not going to get a ton of numbers reassigned to you.
Thanks, Comey. I actually missed to mention one logistic thing at the very beginning is in order to disseminate as much as possible this workshop information, this session is actually videotaped and will be posted after the workshop. So when you ask the questions, that in addition to mention your name, and also if you could smile, that helps too. Okay, with that, maybe I will have Jaime first. Go. Oh, okay.
Mine is real quick. Marika Pointer again with the City of Irvine. Just to confirm, the RHNA subcommittee making the appeals is just going to be the electeds, correct? The ex officios are no longer involved, including discussion, correct?
Our charter allows for the ex officio members as they're considered members of the committee. They just don't vote and are now not counted for quorum purposes. So they would still be in the appeals process if they are still serving as ex officio members.
Okay, I just would like to comment. We had a discussion with Joanne Africa some time ago about that, and I was told that they would be removed and they would not be included in the discussion at the time of the appeals. So if you could just circle back and confirm that, because I was told something 2 months ago that is in conflict with that.
Okay, on that note, we are certainly not aware of that. And I think the RHNA subcommittee charter, I think, speaks, very clearly on that. And that was approved by the regional council. So with that, Jaime, yes.
Is it on? Yeah. Jaime Murillo with the City of Newport Beach. I just really quick question, or SCAG staff can maybe expand. What was the justification, or I guess rationale, for if the adjustments are over 7% to keep in the appeals in the same county, when the draft methodology already seems to disproportionately move a lot of units to certain counties?
Sure. So Jaime, the 7% is actually in statute, and that is not specific to county. That is not specific to anything other than a jurisdiction's share of the entire regional number. So it's basically, if appeals, the total of the appeals is under 93,928, it's a sheer proportionality. It's only any amount above that. If we do get to a point where there is an amount of 100,000-ish or more in terms of the appeal volume, that we would enact for only that delta, for that difference, this kind of second redistribution methodology, which would follow the existing need, which does have the county element that you describe. I do want to point out on that too, it's hypothetically possible, as obviously there are many hypotheticals, for successful appeals to be in the other direction, for you to get a reduction technically, because another jurisdiction can appeal. So that would follow the same process as well.
Okay, with that, any questions Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Hello, I'm Anna Anger. I'm a legislative analyst for the LA City Council. I have two questions. So the first one is in the appeals board's process of evaluating appeals that are filed, would HCD's comments carry any more weight than individual jurisdictions' comments, given that HCD's approval of the methodology was kind of the final, like, okay, like confirmation that this methodology furthers the objectives?
It would be at the direction or pleasure of the board. We'll include all comments from jurisdictions and HCD that were received, and we'll also include them in our analysis, staff analysis of whether or not our recommendation if the appeal should be granted or not. But it would be up to the board to decide that.
Okay, and my second question is also about the board's process of evaluating appeals. So if a jurisdiction were to file an appeal based on changing circumstances or application of methodology and not their local planning like ordinances, would their local planning or housing element measures and strategies be considered in the evaluation of their process to kind of assure, like, okay, so this appeal is valid and fair, but we still are trying to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to further promote the objectives nonetheless? Like, would that be taken into consideration?
Everything that's included in the appeal application and documentation will be reviewed. So if that's included, we will consider it, but if it's not, there's no way for us to bring that up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I will go to the regional office, and I think maybe coming back, I think, to the LA office to wrap up. So I think any questions from the Orange County office?
No questions here. Thank you.
Okay, the San Bernardino office?
No questions. Thank you.
Riverside office?
One question from here.
Go ahead.
If appeals are successful, Riverside County has its unincorporated, larger county unincorporated community, a number of cities. If city appeals are successful, some cities, some not, county's appeal is successful, is the redistribution throughout the SCAG, potential redistribution throughout the SCAG region, or is it limited to the county?
Hi, thanks for the question. The first 7%, up to 93,928 units region-wide, would be distributed across the entire region, and that's actually per statute. Any amount above 7% of the total would be redistributed according to the more detailed secondary methodology in the packet, which roughly follows the existing needs side of the draft methodology, and that does have a county element to it.
Thank you.
Okay, CVAC office. Okay, hearing none. Now we will go to the web related questions. I think we have. Mac. Yes.
Yeah, we have about 13 questions and they're still coming in. So the first one is, can the regional council do a reconsideration of their allocation vote at their meeting this week?
Currently, obviously, because the person, this is just through text, but in terms of reallocation, that would occur at the end of the appeals process, and we are required to have a reallocation after the appeals is concluded. So if you wanted to comment specifically on any of the factors we're considering in the reallocation, we are taking those through Monday, and then we'll present the appeals procedures, including how we would reallocate, starting with the RHNA subcommittee on February 24th. I hope whoever asked that, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, just one second.
Just this is Darren Chitsey. Just want to add, was the question about, and it's hard to know via text, but could the regional council adjust the adopted methodology this month, I think is how we read it. Certainly, RHNA statute outlines a very deliberate path and timelines. Part of those timelines are certainly review by HCD, as well as the timelines to meet into regional transportation planning cycle, as well as ensure that everything is adopted prior to cities having adequate time to update their housing elements. So given that, and where we are in the process, it's certainly always the board will make decisions and does need to adopt it. But given the timelines and associated with it, HCD has approved it, and any adjustment to that we would read as having to restart that cycle and go through that process again.
Thanks, Darren. So if we will need to restart the cycle, then we will not be able to meet the statutory required timeline. So, okay. And yes.
The next question is, what, if any, punitive measures are anticipated for not meeting your RHNA requirements during the 6th cycle? Additionally, can you describe what constitutes a good faith or earnest attempt to meet RHNA requirements?
Sure. So at the minimum, jurisdictions are required to take the reallocation and update their local housing elements through sites, zoning analysis, and other programs, and then get them reviewed by HCD to ensure that they're compliant with state housing law. So that's the minimum. So cities or jurisdictions are still not required to build housing, though it's always housing, affordable housing. We are in a housing crisis. We're always trying to promote increasing housing supply. But jurisdictions also have to submit their annual progress reports, or APRs, to HCD every year, measuring how much progress they made against their RHNA allocation. But in terms of building, there aren't any strict penalties or outlined penalties in state housing law. There is by right requirements under SB 35, but those are not requirements to build per se, but it's more of ensuring that the jurisdiction isn't a barrier for when that housing project or the applicant has applied to build in the jurisdiction. So I don't want to detract too much by going into SB 35, but whoever asked that question, we can get back to you too with more details about SB 35 and other planning opportunities, or what happens if you don't build enough housing.
Okay, good.
How many jurisdictions RHNA numbers can one city appeal? As in, can one city appeal many other cities' numbers?
As much as I hate to answer it, you can appeal 197 jurisdiction draft allocations. I don't encourage it. And we hope that every appeal that is submitted, that you've at least taken the time, because staff has to respond to it. So if you just submit an application without much documentation, it's harder for us to respond, and also harder for you to make your case. So at least be thoughtful and get some documentation to support why you're submitting that appeal.
Can SCAG please clarify the timing of the adoption of Connect SoCal with the conclusion of the RHNA appeals process?
Okay, so the adoption of the Connect SoCal is scheduled for April 2nd. And so and that is why that we choose actually on the same day to distribute the draft RHNA allocation just prior to the board's adoption of the Connect SoCal.
This one's similar to a question that was previously asked, but can SCAG confirm that overproduction of housing in the 5th cycle be a valid reason to appeal a jurisdiction's RHNA for the 6th cycle?
So overproduction isn't really quoted as either a local planning factor or AFFH, a change of circumstance, or application of methodology. If you can at least place that within one of those 3 bases for appeal, we would still review whatever you submit. So underproduction is definitely cited, though overproduction specifically is not.
Will all appeals filed be made public before the comment period?
We can certainly look into that. There may be some back and forth because sometimes someone will submit something and then they have an amendment to it. So we'll evaluate when we will appeal, but we'll make sure to blanket the region with announcements of the key dates and when the appeals will be posted.
Should a jurisdiction include in their appeal any recommended areas that SCAG or HCD should look at for relocation with justification?
My apologies to whoever, the submitter of that question. I'm not exactly sure what the relocation, what they're referring to, but we can respond directly to your question by email.
What does land suitable for urban development or for conversion to residential use mean? Could a jurisdiction appeal based on land subject to sea level rise and or land designated as ESHA? Sea level rise in ESHA reduces the land available for development.
It is certainly a possibility. So Government Code 65584.04E2B, that's the local planning factor regarding the available land suitable for urban development or conversion to residential use, et cetera. That could be something that's used as a basis for appeal, but we do have to consider all the other factors and documentation that the applicant is filing. But I do have to note that it says that the COG may not limit its consideration of suitable sites or land suitable for urban development to existing zoning ordinances and land use restrictions of a locality, but shall consider the potential for increased residential development under alternative zoning ordinances and land use restrictions. So it's not just about the availability of land for this factor. And so whatever documentation that you submit, if you choose that as your basis for appeal, we'll be reviewing those that evidence.
Since the appeal procedure is based on statute, can SCAG, acting for its members, sponsor legislation to alter appeal procedures both at the methodology level, the regional allocation level, and the local allocation level?
Okay, on that one, I will take that. Probably not for this cycle, but certainly I think any suggestions for future cycles, I think are welcome, I think, to provide to us.
Okay, we have 4 more. Is reallocation after appeal based on subregions or is it based on the entire SCAG area?
So to kind of go over that again, the first 93,928 units which are successfully appealed would follow the very specific statutory process whereby they're reallocated proportionate to your original RHNA methodology. Any amount above that follows the secondary methodology kind of described in the packet, which is roughly similar to the existing need, jobs transit with a slight reallocation in that.
Can SCAG confirm the date as to when a change circumstance would be considered?
Sure. So change of circumstance, it's based on the survey of planning factors that was sent out last year. So since the start of that period, it's outlined in the procedures, but we are also looking for comments too, because last time for prior cycles that was not defined, essentially not defined. So when the change of circumstance occurred, we also have to consider too our growth forecast process as well. And so the change of circumstance, I would generally look at the planning factor survey that was sent out in spring of last year. But of course, there could be instances outside of that since possibilities are infinite for the appeals process. So there may be something that could not be rectified or brought up in any way anyway during the planning factor process. So just generally think of it as the start of, or when the survey was sent out and after any submissions were received.
If changes to the data sets have recently been submitted to SCAG and SCAG has determined the changes to be accurate and accepted, have the data set tables been revised and have they been incorporated into the methodology estimator tool?
Again, because it's just an online question, I don't know I can't clarify a couple of the details on that, but I believe what it's referring to is the integration of some of the finalized data sets, which will be part of the calculator tool. We will be posting that in advance of the February 24th RHNA subcommittee meeting. There are some small area data sets that are linked to the development of the Connect SoCal Regional Transportation Plan SCS, and those any minor modifications related to that, just for the sake of consistency, will be integrated into the RHNA estimator tool, which will be posted in advance of February 24th. Now, as far as it relates to appeals, any additional data that needs to be that would be submitted as part of an appeal could be submitted at that time. Is that?
Okay. I think any.
Yeah, we got a couple more.
Okay.
This can be, I think this is the last one though. Do you know if ADUs can be used to meet affordable housing RHNA numbers and how? And also can alternative housing facilities such as aged care, group homes, et cetera, be used to meet any RHNA numbers?
In general, yes, ADUs can be used towards meeting RHNA need, but they would need to be, let's say a jurisdiction says therefore low income RHNA need. There would need to be some kind of proof or documentation or evidence that supports that the unit is affordable to a low income household. For other types, they can be. It just depends on whether or not they're considered group quarters or not. And if they're registered as a housing unit with DOF, they can be. And again, it has to do with the affordability that would then determine which income category that you're meeting in for RHNA need. And I can also engage in conversation after this workshop with the person that asked that, since it does kind of go off from the appeals procedures.
Okay, great. I think really appreciate all the comments. I think sounds like the Super Bowl, I think really generate a lot of creative energy. And so I think I missed a couple of people in Los Angeles. So we will basically wrap up any additional comments from the Los Angeles. I thought I missed you and then okay.
Sure, quick question. Again, Tim Howe, City of San Fernando. The question about accessory dwelling units, does the same hold true for junior accessory dwelling units?
I think they can, but we can also talk offline about the documentation and how you would report that to HCD.
Okay, Susan.
I'm sorry, I'm just a little unclear still on the secondary methodology for reallocation. How final is that? I understand the first methodology is state law, but is that something that'll be approved through all the subcommittees and could be subject to change, where similar to how the methodology changed at the RC and all of a sudden we had new rules? Could that happen at the RC for this as well?
So that is defined as part of the RHNA appeal, SCAG's RHNA appeal guidelines. So that overall does have to go through the adoption process you describe. I do want to maintain though that it's a much more limited in scope. It's a much more hypothetical. Whether or not we even get to that point is an open question. But yes, that is part of SCAG's RHNA appeal procedures.
Okay, great. Yes. Okay, just come in and then okay. Just mention your name.
Sure. Hi, this is Jalem Mirshami. I'm former SCAG employee. I'm coming from Santa Monica, and I have a question regarding, first of all, when we can submit the data to for this purpose. So when is the deadline?
Sure. So we don't have the exact date for the start of the filing period for RHNA, but it will be in early April. So we'll have all of this posted and it will be included in the staff report for the February 24th meeting as well. But early April is when it will start. And then it's through mid-May. So it's 45 days to file an appeal after the start.
And then the second question, what is the enforcement for this? Like we assuming that you process this and finalize, then what is the enforcement for it? I mean, assuming one city doesn't cooperate or cannot even process that per their limitation, then what is the enforcement for it? Excuse me, there's one can go ahead.
Sure. So For the appeals procedures, SCAG follows what's outlined in Government Code 65584.05. And then the appeals procedures are based on what's in state housing law. So those procedures will then be going through our RHNA subcommittee, CHD committee, and regional council. So we anticipate them being adopted as the final appeals procedures in March. And then SCAG will follow those procedures. So after the appeals filing period, there'll be a comment period, and then all filed appeals will have a hearing date in July to hear all of the appeals. So we'll be following the adopted procedures.
Okay, I really want to thank all of you, I think, for the participation, as well as I think many of the questions that will help us to refine the draft document that you have. So before we close, I think just a couple final notes. And I think, again, I think all the workshop related materials are posted at the SCAG webpage, and also the video recording, I think, will also be posted, I think, after this workshop. And so the comments on the draft appeals procedure, I think the deadline is next Monday, and please send to the housing@scag.ca.gov. So the next step after that is the RHNA subcommittee meeting 3 weeks from today, the February 24th. And we are currently aiming, I think, to have the agenda posted on Tuesday, and we will try to do that, I think, sooner than that if we could. So the posting of the agenda will also be followed immediately, I think, by the RHNA calculator. So I think with that, I think we will conclude today's workshop, and I think would encourage you, I think, to let your colleague and friends know about this event. And I think all information will be posted on the web. And the last thing is that any questions, comments, please use the RHNA email address, and so that it helps us not just in terms of internal operation, but also in terms of record keeping. If you want any specific staff for attention, I think just copy the staff person. So with that, thank you all very much.